Good evening and welcome to tonight's live virtual program presented by the Howell Carnegie District Library and the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor Brighton Howell Unit. I'm Brandy Tambasco, Adult Services Librarian here at the library. Thanks again for joining us this evening. I have a few housekeeping items to share before we start the presentation. Tonight's program is scheduled to run until 8 p.m. and we're going to be hard on that and very respectful of everybody's time stopping at that time. During the program, all attendees will be muted, so please share any questions for the presenter or report any technical issues you may have in the chat. I am monitoring that throughout the program. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation. If you wish to ask a question at that time, let us know in the chat, or as you see on the screen, use that raise hand option under reactions and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question briefly. We'll address as many audience questions as we can before the program ends. This program is being recorded and the recording will be available on the library's YouTube channel soon after this live program. We'll email you when it's there. If you do not want your video in the recording, please make sure your video is turned off, that there is a red flash through the camera icon in the bottom left corner of your Zoom window. I'm also going to stop some people's videos as well, just so that we can focus on the presentation and not be distracted by anything fun anybody else is getting up to. Now, without further ado, I'll turn things over to Ellen Lafferty, the chairperson of our local League of Women Voters unit.
All right. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful evening tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed this lovely day we had. We're so fortunate to have the Howell Carnegie Library partner with us on these virtual programs. And we wish to thank Brandy and her staff for all their hard work in putting tonight's program together for us. Those of you who are unfamiliar with the League of Women Voters, we are a political organization that encourages active participation of our citizens in their government. We do this by registering eligible voters, no matter what age, well, obviously eligible is 18 and up, and educating these new voters to exercise their rights, their voting rights, such as using the absentee ballot as a voting option. The League also holds candidate forums prior to each election, along with publishing our Vote 411 voter guide to inform voters of the positions of all candidates on major issues in order for you to become a more informed voter. The League is nonpartisan and we do not support, endorse, or oppose political candidates or parties. We also work to increase understanding of major policy issues, such as ballot proposals. And an example of these educational programs that we hold will be our next town hall, taking place on April 29th at 7 p.m. We're going to be joining other leagues across the state throughout the month of April to educate Michigan voters on the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Leagues have undertaken a widespread educational effort to help voters understand redistricting and to ensure the commission is being what voters have asked for citizens to draw district lines instead of legislators or special interests, and for the commission to respect communities of interest. We hope you can join us on Thursday, April 29th at 7 p.m. Registration for this event begins this Thursday, April 8th, through the Howell Library's community calendar. And also, we're going to be preparing for another full election season in 2022. And in addition to our registration and voter education, we're going to be expanding our work even more to support the senior citizens in our area. We want to ensure that they're knowledgeable and able to vote and it's not hampered by any changes to their living situations. So that's our next task on our plate. If you'd like to join our efforts or perhaps provide us your financial support to continue with our work, please go to our website right here at lwvbrightonhowellarea.org. We have a beautiful new website, and one of its assets is if you need to write or contact a federal, state, or local representative, all of their contact information is now available on their website. It's kind of like a nice one-stop shopping for you. So that's enough for me right now. I'd like to turn over the introduction of tonight's speaker to one of our league members, Claire Donovan. And Claire is one of the founding members of our league, and she also is on the board of the Livingston Diversity Council. We're fortunate for her efforts in bringing this program to us this evening. Thank you, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. Ellen pointed out that my involvement in both of these groups is a perfect example of what you're going to hear a lot about tonight, which might be some intersectionality. Both of these groups have had the goal of coming together, and you might wonder, what does the Diversity Council and the League of Women Voters have in common? Why would they come together? What's their common point? And hopefully after listening to Ellen and Nicole tonight, you will see both of our groups are very dedicated to preserving and advocating for human rights in our cities, in our counties, in our state, and nationally, and any local agencies. So when you stop and consider that, it's a huge task. And so we are super grateful to have Ellen at the head of the League of Women Voters. But then I also have the honor and privilege of introducing to all of you, Nicole Matthews-Creech. We are excited to have her as the director of our Livingston Diversity Council. She is a homegrown Livingston County resident that went to high school at a local high school here. She's worked in the county for over 15 years. Her position at La Casa as Director of Social Change and Advocacy has uniquely prepared her for her position as Director of the Livingston Diversity Council. She comes to us with strong relationships in business, local business, school systems, social service agencies, law enforcement, libraries, and volunteer organizations. Her skill set uniquely qualifies her to lead our community cultural awareness journey. And we all know we need this in Livingston County. And she does this all as a volunteer. So we are very blessed to have her in this county, very blessed to have Ellen Lafferty, two fantastic women leading the helm in this. So Nicole, the Zoom is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. And Ellen, thank you for the intro to the League of Women Voters. Such great information. I am really excited to be here with all of you this evening. Thank you so much for logging on to our session. Just a few moments of acknowledgements. Thank you to the Howell Carnegie District Library. I think these programs are great. I love the library resources and the quick switch that all of our libraries have done to support folks during this time and creating these virtual programs. I really want to thank Brandy Tambasco for providing us some technical support tonight. It takes a lot of responsibility off those of us who are speaking. So I very much appreciate that time, as well as the beautiful artwork that was created for the flyer for this event by the library. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for taking the opportunity to lift up the work of the Livingston Diversity Council. As Claire mentioned, it is a nonprofit organization run by a board of really dedicated volunteers. The hope is, of course, to staff some positions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on this evening. But it really takes groups like League of Women Voters to make space for us to reach out to the community and let people know that the Diversity Council is here and what the Diversity Council looks like now, as opposed to 34 years ago when the council was started, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. Thank you to WHMI for all of the press that was received for this event, and thank you to all of you for, again, making time and space for this conversation this evening, for making this a priority in your life and in your community, and also for a lot of you for sharing this on your social media. I saw a bunch of great posts about sharing the opportunity to join us tonight. So thank you to all of you who were our kind of social media warriors and getting this information out to our Livingston County community as well. Okay, so learning from our past to create a better future. Our community's past is really just pretty much the first thing we have to talk about. So the statement at the top, I think, is really a critical piece for us to start. And so that's just a statement that while racism is not exclusive to our community, we have a unique and critical connection to it. And I think it's important that, you know, the narrative that's out there is, of course, that racism exists everywhere. And it's really easy for communities, for industries, for systems, for individuals to say it's everywhere. So it's just what it is. It is what it is. And I really want to challenge that, you know, while it's not exclusive to our community, we have a unique and critical connection to it, and we have a responsibility to address it. It is not something to just say it just exists and there's nothing we can do with that. And you guys are proof positive that there is something that we can do about it because you're here this evening. So just want to talk a little bit, really briefly, about our history, because it is important to frame work that needs to be done. So Cohocton Township, just north of Howell, was home to Robert Miles, Michigan's KKK Grand Dragon, from 1971 to 1992. Robert Miles was probably best known for a couple of things. There's probably lots of other stories, and we could spend days upon days acknowledging all of the things, but we're just going to highlight a few things here. The Pontiac bus bombing in August of 1971 that occurred in response to forced integration. There were buses that were going to take kids to other school districts, to other school systems to force integration. And Robert Miles and 5 other members of the Klan were found responsible and convicted of sedition for those bombings. The actual, I think, conviction took place in May of 1973. At that time, during that time and further on in the years, he operated the Mountain Church, which operated on his farm in Cohocton. There were services that brought in folks not only locally, but really from across the state, because he was the Grand Dragon for the state of Michigan, happened to live in Cohocton and associated then with our community. And there were weekly cross burnings every Sunday night and this was something that I didn't, I think, fully appreciate as a person who was pretty much, I lived in Livingston County my entire life. We moved to Brighton when I was 10, and you know, I overheard conversations about these things happening, but not until probably fairly recently, within the last few years, really started to understand the full depth and breadth of what happened within our community during those times. And so, you know, that really brings in some interesting pieces that we need to be aware of, that there were those weekly cross burnings every Sunday night as a significant piece of activity that needed to continue on. Shortly before his death, Miles encouraged other Klansmen to go underground and breathe like crazy. And the reason that I chose that quote to share is that I think, you know, there's a lot of conversation around the fact that Klans don't exist anymore. The Klan certainly doesn't exist here, and you know, there's a lot of folks, groups that keep an eye on these events and on hate groups and hate crimes across the country. But there are so many ways for folks to connect outside of things that are really publicly alert to the general community. And so I think it's important to note that was a directive that was given by Miles. Miles was cremated in 1992 when he passed, and his ashes were buried on his family farm in Cohocton. So those are still there. as a representation. In 2005, so fast forwarding a little bit, a controversial auction was held at the Gray Auction House in downtown Howell to sell Miles' effects. There was a great response from the Diversity Council at that time to let folks know that this was something that we did not want to see anybody profit from. And there was lots of really great conversations. This occurred shortly before my tenure began at the council, but definitely stories upon stories of conversations that were held and peaceful protests about the auction. Some of the auction items were given to museums so that they could talk about the history and use it as a positive. Some were taken to Central Michigan University up there, and a lot of education still occurs around those items. It's interesting if you ever find in the archives, there's some interviews with some folks who were active at that time, one of which is Gary Gray, who owned the Gray Auction House, and he refers to Robert Miles as kind of a folk hero in his interview. And so there's just interesting choice of words. And in this work, it's important, I think, to challenge ourselves and each other with our words, with the use of our words, and making sure that we're acknowledging the power of words, the impact of words that is held there. So according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there is no Klan activity. There is not any Klan activity that currently exists in Livingston County. So that being said, that begets the question, if there's no Klan, is there racism? The answer is clear. It's yes, of course. But it is a narrative that is oftentimes spun in our community, in that that was 25 years ago. He died so 30 years, so 29 years ago. And so is that safe to say that, racism doesn't exist? And there are a lot of folks that really cling to that piece, that there's no activity, we're not racist, we're not a racist community anymore. And again, to some degree, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but of course, racism cases, and in fact, and underground now, because there is no Klan activity. There's no outward, things happening in the community. But the answer to that question is yes, and that's evidenced by the what I wrote as unwritten rules and unspoken fears by persons of color coming to or through the county. Many there's still messaging that's given to folks of color that it is not safe to go through this county, that if you're heading through the 96 thoroughfare route from Lansing to Detroit or Detroit to Lansing, that you don't stop in the county. That folks who have been in Livingston County, who have an intent to come, oftentimes feel that they have to have a story, have to have a reason. Is when they get pulled over, they have a reason to be here. And thinking about whether racism exists in that mindset is a silly question. That if a person has to come up with a reason because they know that this is going to have to be and that they're going to have to justify their existence, that is evidence by daily interactions experienced by our residents of color. There are racial slurs, there are questions that are asked, there are microaggressions that drip with racism for our residents of color, for our families of color, for our students of color in our community. And this also is evidenced by a lack of diversity in our community. And there's some circular logic that oftentimes gets pulled in with these conversations, is that people will say, well, we don't have to worry about diversity. Why do we have a council? I get this question a lot. Why do we have a diversity council? We don't have diversity here. Okay, so first is the explanation of what diversity actually means, and it goes well beyond color and race and ethnicity. But also the critical piece to that is that that diversity doesn't exist in our community because people don't feel comfortable coming here. So it's a rather upside down argument. There is no diversity here because we don't talk about it. There is no diversity here because we don't do anything to address it. That we have created created our community in that. So a broader impact of the past, and then I want to take a few minutes to just kind of check in with folks here. Broader impact of the past. I think as we talk and as our and the drive to anti-racism, it's really important, as Claire talked about here, to acknowledge intersectionality, to acknowledge that communities linked with the oppression group are often seen as oppressive to other groups. And I put seen as in parentheses because you can make the statement that communities linked with the oppression is the way that we're seeing that way. Again, it's perception, and a lot of folks, as a method of protection, like to villainize the perception, that it's just the perception, it's not who we really are. And so just a few little examples, not even little, a few examples, brief examples of where these things still exist. Oppression still exists beyond racism. Racial slurs spray painted on homes and cars in 2013. We had an incident in our community, and we're able to support some folks who were targeted and victimized in that situation. Racist tweets following a Howell basketball game in 2014. The game was against Grand Blanc, which is a predominantly white school, but had a few Black players. And there were tweets that came out after that game saying hashtag Hitler is my dad and hashtag another win for the whites. So this occurred in 2014. Our Patriot Front flyers that were in response, they were posted all over downtown Howell in response to a fundraiser held at the Howell Theater at that time. It was a Bollywood film and was being held there by an organization from Ann Arbor to support girls' education in India. Homophobic slurs spray painted on a home in 2019. We've seen a huge increase in anti-Asian American social media posts, blaming our Asian American residents and friends and families for the existence of the coronavirus pandemic that we are all facing at this time. Obviously, that is not alone, and relegated to Livingston, but we are seeing those things here. Students and families of color sharing their experiences with racism. We're seeing a lot more of those happening on social media, through emails, through connections with other families, really sharing what they're experiencing as being a part of this community. And students identifying with the LGBTQIA plus community are reaching out and talking about their feelings of being devalued, of not being recognized, of not being acknowledged, of being dismissed, of not acknowledging their pronouns or dismissing their pronouns, or just forgetting to use the proper pronoun that person has chosen as using for themselves. And so we are seeing these various oppressions. And so while the focus of a lot of our conversation in Livingston is around anti-racism and specifically with people of color, we experience oppression of various kinds, and oftentimes those that represent very, very various intersectionalities in that case. So acknowledgement and ownership of our past is key for change. And this is where we sit. This is the conversation that is trying to be moved from that was our past, we don't want to talk about it anymore, or that was our past, we need to just get over it. That was our past, we can't do anything to change it, to this was our past, and this past has informed our current existence, and it will continue to inform our future if we don't do something to address it and take responsibility for that piece. So that is a big, before I do that, I would love to address questions if folks want to raise their hand, speak out into the space and ask those questions. Feel free to do so at this time.
Nicole, we have had some comments going on in the chat about, is there anything you'd like to address on that?
Absolutely. And that was the last thing that was supposed to be on my slide. I think I bumped off. So when we talk about the fact that, so thank you for the question, because when we talk about we're acknowledged no Klan activity by the Southern Poverty Law Center, we are still known as a sundown town. The city of Brighton and the city of Howell are both recognized as sundown towns. The concept for anyone that's not familiar of sundown town is that it is not safe for a person of color to be seen in the community after sundown, that at that point, they will be seen as having ill intent in being here, and it's not safe for them to be here. I would argue that even during the day, folks are still, you know, concerned about being in the community because of the history and the reputation that our community has. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
And there was one more about the church group meeting a few weeks ago. Yes, about hacking the Zoom meeting. Somebody commented about that in regards to the presence of hate groups in the county.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of those, we have seen an increase in Zoom bombings. Knock on wood, I have one right by me. The Diversity Council hasn't had any experience with any Zoom bombings, but I know that some of our local government meetings have experienced those, as well as some of our local churches and other nonprofit organizations as they hold their virtual meetings. And sometimes it's really hard to tell whether those are coming from inside the community or whether they're coming from outside the community. I believe, but I am not sure, so don't quote me on it. I believe that that's something they've been able to identify as being within the county, but the majority of that is still under investigation, and I'm not sure how successful it will be. I mean, the tracing of that seems to be pretty complicated, as my understanding. I do know that oftentimes our folks are really experiencing some challenges as well around that, because the person who might be running the meeting may not necessarily be in Livingston County at that time, but that those attending the meeting are in Livingston County. So then the question becomes jurisdiction of who needs to handle the case and who needs to investigate the case. So as with all of this technology, this is something new, even that our criminal justice system is really kind of working their way through. And I'm sure probably not in the way that we would like to see them do that. You know, and that's where systemic change comes in, and that's where these conversations come in, advocating for an awareness and a change in addressing those issues.
Great, thank you. People are sharing some comments about their experiences here in the area that speaks to what you've been saying and confirming that. And there's a lot of thanks going on for what you're doing with the Livingston Diversity Council, what you're bringing up tonight. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you very much for that, Brandy. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on. I just want to talk a little bit about the Diversity Council. I mean, the reality is that there is a lot going on in our community, a lot of really good going on in our community. And as someone who has worked for social change in Livingston County I was with La Casa for 21 years and left there as a director of social change advocacy, which was really my goal, was systemic change. That's what we did. That's what my department did. And I see the potential. We collaborate really, really well. And so there is some really positives to this. And so I want to make sure that folks get the feeling that it's not all doom and gloom. But we're certainly in for a challenge and in for a battle with that. The other conception, as you know, the Diversity Council was brought together in 1987, and so a lot of folks, when they hear Livingston Diversity Council, the first response is, "I had no idea we had one," and then the second response is, "It must be something new, right? It must be something that has just been created in response to all these things that have been going on prior to the." We've been around since 1987, and we owe a debt of gratitude to those folks who pulled together the council back then. In 1987. So it was initiated by a group of private citizens, business owners, local government officials, folks just in response to local and national incidents of racism and hate. You know, there was a lot of focus, obviously, on KKK and the Grand Dragon's residency here. And what was happening on his farm, but there were certainly things that were going on around the country as well at that time. Status was given as a 501c3 as Livingston 2001, and sometimes you'll still find something that says Livingston 2001, which makes me smile. The idea behind the name Livingston 2001 was that in 1987, those children that were in kindergarten that year in 87 were to be graduating high school in 2001. And the goal was to create a changed community for those kids before they left the community. And so I really have I have a fond kind of connection to that name, and I like seeing it once in a while. So they established a board of directors, and so has always operated since then as a volunteer board. in the early stages, a civil response team in not so formalized language was developed to respond collaboratively to acts of racism, acts of hate in the community. Sometimes it involved local law enforcement, sometimes it involved local paper, sometimes it involved a local school district, whoever was impacted by that. And then there were conversations with this kind of already established group. So you didn't have to find people to have the conversation with. That group was established. And we still do that today when these things occur. All that was shared earlier about the basketball game back in 2014 and the homophobic slurs that were spray painted on a resident's home were handled and talked through and supported by this kind of civil response team. The focus of the group was, certainly driven by membership, still is today. And at that time was really reactionary in nature. But as the time went by with the council, folks really focused on a shift in becoming more proactive and having conversations, initiating activities, events to gather folks together, gather like-minded folks together to have conversations. Annual events were held throughout the years. There were really large ones that I hear still very fond stories of from my board members who have a little more history than I do with the organization. And then some small ones, which were just as critical to the success of those events and to the council, but really all with the goal of awareness and education. 2010 marked an even stronger shift in toward intentional change, providing opportunities for the community to gather, utilizing our web-based tools, utilizing our technology to educate, share with folks, creating social media presence, and engaging with the community in those ways. In 2017, 2018, this is the slide that makes me a little sad, but it's really important. The LDC was down to 6 members, 6 board members with a lot of history and desire for change, but really low on energy and ideas. And, the shift was really happening with technology at that time. And the board was kind of feeling like they were floating out there. And so we had some really hard conversations at that time and determined that as a group, we still needed to be in Livingston County. But if we were going to do that, we needed to dedicate ourselves to building a strong council that could really make some change. And so we really focused on, at that time, diversifying our board, not in just the sense that one would think when we talk about diversity. Of course, diversification with experiences and identities is certainly one of those key kind of skills. So really diversifying our board, addressing our foundational policies and procedures, enhancing our board education was really key at that time to ensure that as we are talking to other folks in the community, we need to be able to be changed on a very regular basis. Before that, our website was pretty static, and weren't able to make a lot of changes during that time. In late 2018, our LDC offers were expanded to focus more on our LGBTQIA+ family, friends, and neighbors, as Pride Alliance of Livingston was initiated and brought under the auspices of the council. Pride Alliance of Livingston is identified as a committee of the council, but for all intents and purposes, they could very easily be their own 501c3. A conversation with our steering committee for Pride Alliance and our board of directors for the council was that we wanted to be able to provide that benefit per Pride Alliance as having 501c3 status without having to go through all of the things that were required so that they could get up and moving and create action, and that LDC could benefit from the energy and the amazing intent and the amazing goals that were outlined already in the first few months of the Pride Alliance coming together. And so they are so much more than a committee, even though that is the word that is used to describe our Pride Alliance of Livingston. The LDC now operates with an 18-member board of directors. We have 8 active committees for our external, and those external committees include our LDC membership. So members outside of our board, folks that represent other organizations in the community, are able to participate in these initiatives and kind of community action committees. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute. We also really have this robust and communicative website that we can make very simple changes very quickly. Our LDC connections, we get about 15 to 20 web inquiries a month. We've had a 200% growth in our social media engagement. And in 2020, there was a 25% increase in membership in just that year. So we are seeing, again, the good news is that there are more and more folks that want to see this work done. And that is inspiring. So our mission and our vision, our mission is that we are a change agent for diversity, equity, inclusion, and access that collaborates, educates, and empowers to build a thriving community. Our vision is that Livingston County will be a transformative community that embraces and empowers all people for their uniqueness and their contributions. We struggled a little bit with our recent change in our vision statement because transformative is something that's ever changing. A vision statement is supposed to be where you arrive to. And we felt that in this work, it is really critical to understand and acknowledge that this work is never done. That there will always be something, because there will always be people and the human factor that changes. That human factor, humans' needs change, humans' engagements change. And so transformative was the word that we used to get out of having to have an arrival location, but really truly feel that we need to be ready to transform. We need to be at the ready to change and grow at any given time in this work. Our board of directors, I'm not going to go through it, but you can see on the screen where our representation lies with our board of directors. In addition to those listed on your screen are several members of our board who may not necessarily represent organizations specifically, but they are what I call our civic advocates or our community activists. Everybody has, I have lots of terms of endearment for folks, and those that are retired and given of their time are so critical to the work that's done at the council, in addition to those that are listed here on the screen as members of our board. Our internal committees, I won't bore you with those things. Advancement, our membership, governance, policies, procedures, marketing, branding. Of course, we got to talk about that. And then strategic planning, which right now is just an ad hoc committee for LDC. Our community action committees is really where I want to focus a little bit of attention. I talked about Pride Alliance already, really focusing on the education and awareness surrounding our LGBTQIA+ community. And I'll talk about conversations after the killing of Armada Aubrey and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and how as a predominantly white community can we have those conversations. And how can we engage in learning with each other? And so that group really brought together some community conversations that has now transitioned into the creation of our organizational resolutions, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Our training committee is really focused on, you guessed it, training, educational opportunities, ways to bring information out to folks. And so their main focus is our monthly online learning conversations that occur on via Zoom on the third Wednesday of every month, and those are open to the public, and you can find the links to them on our website. So we'll have more information on those coming up. And then our DE&I and Schools Committee, or Diversity and Inclusion within our Schools Committee. This is our newest committee that was started in January of this year, and is really charged with identifying where our schools are at with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of their efforts. At this time, we do have representation from all 5 school districts, as well as some of our charter schools in that group. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. A couple points of pride: we are still the only community-based county-level diversity council serving the state of Michigan. There are other groups that are specific to identity. You see a lot of pride groups out there, and but something that we can be proud of as Livingston County is that we have a general but over the years provided some small grants to field trips for the Henry Ford Museum to see a civil rights exhibit, also supporting exchange programs for students to travel to other countries. Assisted with the diversity resolution for Howell schools. This was a little back in the day, but something that we're still really proud of, because Howell schools actually still has the best anti-discrimination resolution and ordinance and policies of all of our districts. Anti-discrimination ordinance with the city of Howell that happened in 2016. Again, a really good point of pride for the council in being able to speak to the city of Howell's dedication to ensuring that there was an anti-discrimination ordinance that covered our folks that identify in the LGBTQIA+ community. And then just creating new partnerships with local businesses and organizations. That is something that really is our focused effort right now, to talk about what those partnerships look like and how we can benefit each other, how the Diversity Council can support local efforts in businesses and organizations, and how they can support the work of the council. So really creating those partnerships. Our current initiatives, activities, again, our community conversation series that began in June of 2020 are all a welcome cling. You can see on the screen there. This was developed by Pride Alliance of Livingston and is available for businesses, for agencies, organizations, schools, even homes. If you are interested in getting a cling to put up on your window, email me. My email will be at the end of it, but it's livingstondiversitycouncil@gmail. Super easy. We want these clings to be everywhere. In order for a business to put a cling up in their window, they do have to sign our social agreement that really commits themselves to disrupting bias, to disrupting microaggressions, to disrupting harassment and bullying behavior in their establishment. And so it has some teeth to it. It's not just putting it up in your window because it's the right thing to do, but putting it up in your window and being willing to stand by it and really support that all are welcome within your establishment. Our Learn, Love, Livingston monthly online learning series, which I talked about a little bit ago from our training committee. We launched that in January 2020 in their professional development opportunities, in their curriculum, as well as extracurricular activities for their students, so that we can start to see what schools are struggling, what schools are doing well, and how can we help everybody do better together. And really the intent of that is then to create a minimum requirement that all schools will meet with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion and offerings for their students. Our restorative practice initiative, which is also a part of our Livingston County Schools DE&I committee, really looking at utilizing restorative practice to work with our students on handling these issues when they come up, when they might say something or post something that is seen as racist or homophobic or oppressive, that oftentimes it can be a conversation with folks to understand the impact of their actions. And that's a critical piece that our students are really poised well to learn from. And then our organizational resolution. So this is the first time that I'm speaking kind of publicly about this, so you're getting a sneak peek. The Community Conversations Committee that I talked about earlier is really focusing their efforts on creating a templated organizational resolution for businesses, organizations to sign on to later on this year, to commit to action steps to addressing diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in their workplace. There will be some standard language that will be consistent among all of those resolutions, acknowledging our history and acknowledging acknowledging our inaction, acknowledging where we've gone, where we've misstepped, where we have missed out on opportunities, but then also committing to action steps to create change within the organization. And we'll have some kind of canned action steps that they can take on, or they can create their own action steps themselves. So more information about that will be available at an upcoming multi-chamber event in the month of May. So stay tuned for that. The future of LDC, Again, a lot of stuff we've already kind of talked about, but we are working with Leadership Livingston on our strategic planning. Our major focus for 2021 is to secure funding for an executive director position. You've heard Claire talk about it, and I certainly have made no bones about the fact that we're all volunteers, but it really needs a focused staffed position to handle what is happening, all of the great things that are happening, and also addressing all of the challenges that are happening within our community. So we really are keen on making a funded position for the council. Down below, you'll see our outreach plan. We're still looking at holding an awareness event. It's probably going to be really late in the year, but if not, it'll be virtual, and that's okay too. Fundraising, of course, some smaller awareness events, gatherings like this are a part of our plan. Our virtual learning opportunities monthly, as well as some agency content specific training that's being developed by our board and through our connections. And then the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion action plans with our local school district. So these are really the goals of the council. My last little bit of information is, of course, the call to action. How can you get involved? Of course, you got to follow and interact with us on social media, get everything out there, keep sharing, join in on our upcoming programs. So our monthly online learning series, the Learn Love Livingston, again, coming up on April 21st. You can also watch our past programming from those monthly sessions on our YouTube channel. We're just listed as Livingston Diversity on YouTube. And then the multi-chamber event, like I said, coming up May 11th to hear more about the organizational resolution opportunity. With that will come some general conversation and education on what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, what it means to focus on DE&I, and the benefit for our organizations and businesses to take the time and the effort and the risk in making that a priority for us as a community. Become a member of the council. Of course, we do rely on our membership to support any of our programs and our efforts. So there's an easy, quick way to become a member, either as an individual or as a business. And there are benefits to becoming a member, certainly beyond the educational opportunities, and you get first alert to that. Coming soon is some member exclusive swag. So with your membership, there'll be something that you can show off to folks about your support of the Diversity Council and the fact that we just exist. So there's some great member benefits for becoming a member of the council. Of course, support any other local DE&I initiatives. And then just my general charge for folks is to start brave conversations. Don't be afraid to open your mouth and be ready to apologize when you misstep, because you will. I do it every day. And that's my little reminder, the humankind be both, because I'm human, so be kind to me. We all make those missteps, and it's really important to acknowledge that, but be able to start those brave conversations anyway. And the last thing is to live, love, and learn intentionally. Make sure that all of that counts, because there's a lot to be done, and your energy can be spread, but make sure that it counts when you do those things. So that is it for my planned presentation. I would love to address any other questions and answers that we might have in the last, oh my goodness, 6 minutes. I am so sorry, but other questions that you have.
Well, we did receive one prior to this asking, considering the lack of diversity in Livingston County, do you feel it impedes young adults from returning to live and work here after they've experienced a more diverse society while away at college?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And I will tell you, it's from my own personal experience. As a Brighton graduate, I left and I was not back. I lived in Kalamazoo. I absolutely loved it, loved the access, loved the diversity, loved the engagement. And absolutely, it was a huge deterrent for me to come back. However, I will also say that people can be moved by opportunity to make change. And that is what inspired me to move back to the community, is that I felt that rather than looking at my experience and saying, well, it was this way, it was lacking, and so I don't want to be there. I took that as then a challenge to create a better situation for incoming generations. And so that to me was my dedication of and my role in creating a community that was open and accepting and inclusive and engaging, and all of those things to encourage folks to come back. I am certainly not alone in that experience. I think it definitely is a deterrent for folks. But when we do these things, and provide more opportunities to folks to get engaged, to make change, then I think we can get away from that challenge.
Thank you. We have just a couple more, see which ones we can cover in this time. Are you aware of, which school districts in Livingston County have started implementing anti-racism policies you know of?
So they all, of course, every community, every district, school district has policy that addresses anti-discrimination. As far as anti-racist policies, you'd be hard pressed to be able to identify or label any of those policies as such at this point. We are in the beginning phases and working with our schools, and I think we will find in our survey that will soon to be released in the next couple of weeks before school ends. I think we will find that many of our schools are in that infancy stage of recognizing maybe some areas where some voids, some gaps in that coverage. So specifically anti-racist policies, I think you'd be hard pressed to label any of the existing policies as such at this time.
All right, I believe that's all we have time for tonight. Ellen?
Thank you so much, Nicole. Fantastic evening. It's such a pleasure to host the Livingston Diversity Council, and you are just such a eloquent speaker. And I hope those who are in attendance tonight can please spread the word about the Livingston Diversity Council. Consider joining them, following them on their social media sites. And again, as she said, have those difficult, challenging conversations with our friends and neighbors. I want to thank, again, Brandy for hosting tonight and the Howell Carnegie Library. And for everybody else, it's such a pleasure to spend the evening with you. Please look for us later on this month, April 29th. And somebody asked about the position of the League on the voter suppression going on, the bills. There's 39 bills right now. I encourage you to go to LWVMI, League of Women Voters for Michigan. And there is a statement put out by our president, Christina Schlitt, and that addresses those bills that are out there now. So that's a good source to look for the position of the League on that. And the recording of tonight's presentation is going to be available on our website and Facebook soon. So I'm going to turn it back to Brandy to wrap things up for us.
Okay, thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you, Claire, for the introduction of Nicole. And Nicole, thank you so very much for sharing about the Livingston Diversity Council and discussing, frankly and openly, the challenges and opportunities our community faces. Thanks again to our partner, the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area, Brighton Howell area, for making this evening possible. Visit their website at www.lwvbrightonhowellarea.org to learn more about the organization and how you can become involved. And thank you all for attending tonight's program. We hope you enjoyed it and got something of value from it. I know I certainly have. Please take a few minutes to tell us what you thought about this program in the short evaluation that I have just shared in the chat, a link to. We'd love to hear your comments. As Ellen mentioned, our next League of Women Voters in Howell Library Partnership Program will be Thursday, April 29th at 7 p.m. about redistricting in Michigan and communities of interest. Sign up starts this Thursday, April 8th at 10 a.m. There is also a link for that in the chat. Visit our website, howelllibrary.org, to discover more upcoming events from the Howell Carnegie District Library. And good night.
Thank you. Good night.